Welcome to I Do What I Do, where we explore how and why folks do what they do to forge their path and create fulfilling, squiggly careers. I'm Zara Bartels, once a dancer, now a creative operator. And in this first season, we're in London, once my home for many years. So whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a creative soul, or just curious about what makes people tick, have a listen. You'll be inspired to do what you do better. Let's go. All right. Good morning, Mr. Pinto. How are you?
I am very well, Miss Lovely Bartels.
I'm so glad you're joining me today. Jason Pinto is in studio with me today. Welcome, and welcome to all the folks who are listening or looking. Welcome to I Do What I Do.
Thank you. Glad to be in the early sort of batch before you become big. I'll be able to say I knew the band before it became the band.
You will probably be part of the help in getting us to be big. Jason, I will let you introduce yourself, but as I open my little lovely notebook, your tagline, Mr. Pinto, engineer, scientist, lover of all things tech, investor and builder.
And that's only part of it. But
And dad.
And
husband.
I kept
and son.
Exactly.
An amazing friend.
Grateful son, all of the above.
So,
grateful husband.
Please introduce yourself to the people. I will pour our drinks. We're going to have some Angostura 1919.
Wicked. First off, thank you for having me. This is a kind of rare privilege in that
I'm the privileged one.
Well, very seldom someone says, could you come and talk about yourself for an hour and a half? It's slightly embarrassing, actually, but I will do what I've been asked to do here. Yeah, so as I said, it's hard to encapsulate yourself in a handful of words, but you got part of my life and obviously mentioned the more important part, which is husband, father, grateful son, brother, etc. But this sort of expanded version of that, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago.
Big up Trinis.
Yeah.
Full Trini clip today, engineer included, Andres.
Nice one. But of course, the secret is I was actually born in Jamaica. So I was born in Kingston because I'm from one of those half Jamaican, half Trini families. That my dad and his side of the family are Jamaican. My mom and her side of the family are Trini. And of course, my parents met and got married here in London.
I feel like that's such a common story, like meeting Caribbean families meeting elsewhere and then connecting their tribes.
100%. I think before we started recording, you mentioned community.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is so important and so obvious when people are far from home, as we all are here. You got to find fellow travelers. You got to find people who empathize with your experience. You got to find people with shared everything. And so obviously my parents found that here in other Caribbean folks. So that's how they met and got married and returned to the Caribbean with, as they say, a muffin in the oven. My sister, we were both born in Jamaica. And then my parents split and we went to... But I grew up in essentially the kind of real example of takes a village to raise a child. And I grew up with my grandparents. I grew up with my mom's sisters and brother. And so I had a very rich childhood. In fact, when I say the word parents, I actually mean that group of people.
Right.
In that I've always used that word in a much more expanded fashion than just nuclear mom and dad. I always meant that's a group of people.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers, my dears.
Yeah. It's always so good. And I have a heavy hand, so I apologize. That's why I left extra there. I tried not to be too heavy this time.
Perfect.
Lovely. It's so funny. I was talking to my friend the other day, and she lives here, 3 kids under 8, and they live in North London. And I was like, honestly, I was thinking about you the other day. I just don't understand how you live in here still. Like, why have you not up sticks and just moved home? Because the village is not only how we all grew up, but I feel like when you have kids, it's so important to be able to have that opportunity for your sanity, but also for them to, different experiences, learning how they handle different adults, different learning types.
100%.
Like, you have your lovely daughter and now your lovely son. He's a little bit newer.
Indeed.
How are you balancing all of those things?
Yeah, with difficulty, as the British say. I think when I was 18, I could not wait to get out of Trinidad.
I feel like a lot of us did that. Not knowing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was young. I think my parents always said they knew from a very young age that my destiny lay outside of Trinidad. Just because of just how I was. But I couldn't wait to get out because when you're at that age, like finding yourself and so on, it feels quite confining, right? You're a rock that's 5,000 square kilometers, 1.7 million people, and you feel like you've talked to all of them.
We only 5,000 square kilometers?
5,200 square kilometers.
See, that's something that you would know as well. I don't even have to question it. I know that's right. 52. Okay, that's good to know. I now retain that.
But you feel confined by it, right? Because
Yeah.
you go to the same parties, see the same people doing the same things, etc. And at that age, you forget all of the amazing things about the country because your mind
You're
is
looking outside.
elsewhere. You're looking outside.
And we have US TV and all the US influencers.
100%.
We have some good British TV too. Allo, Allo, Desmond, you can't knock
Absolutely.
those. But yeah, that's so true. So you jumped out at 18. You said you wanted to be a scientist when you were younger.
Absolutely.
You're part scientist still. You
In my
jumped up-
heart, I don't know much science of
mean,
anything, but in my heart I am.
But also
yeah.
you, like right now in your current role as CEO of Pace Flyr, what do we call it now?
Flyr.
Flyr. We'll get
to that.
We'll
in a
get to
minute.
that.
Yeah.
But now as CEO, you also, I think being a CEO requires not only a understanding of the science of business, but of people.
100%. I always joke that as an entrepreneur, I still am an engineer, but the machine I'm working on is a company actually.
Yeah, exactly. Which is probably
So-
a lot more difficult because the
Hugely
variables.
complicated. Hugely complicated. It was my first experience working in a startup company in the US that like my reverence jumped from those who were doing hard science to people who were building these businesses.
Right.
Because
Which company did you? So wait, 18.
Yeah, we
you
need to
flew
back up,
out.
yeah.
You went. Why did you leave Trinidad?
to study, to do undergrad. So I went to the US to do my undergrad engineering. And that, I have to say, was like a really kind of huge, important, life-changing sort of step for me.
Was it the studying part or the living as an adult part or all of it?
All of the above, in that I was very privileged. I got to go to this very well-ranked and well-regarded university, MIT. And immediately that puts you in a milieu of people who are world-changing. And not that I am, but I met people who clearly were going to change every, excuse me, bumping the microphone. Trinidadian gesticulating, right? I get that.
Bump the
yeah.
microphone as much as you need. I think Andres is happy once he's getting the sound.
Indeed. I strap my arms down and stop the Trini gesticulation. But I think being in a kind of incredibly privileged environment like that, where you're with people who are going to change science, industry, economics, politics, etc., it puts you in this kind of, quite frankly, this different sort of tract, right? And so that absolutely changed my life. It absolutely changed the path that I was on, as well as the potential to live as an adult independently, experiment with every kind of part of my life, politically, like
Yeah.
who I wanted to be as an adult, all these kinds of things, right? You have this, university is this kind of incredible period of your life,
Yeah,
right?
it really is so informative. I think.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible privilege. I know there's this kind of, at least in the tech community, this kind of huge backlash against universities.
Like you don't need a degree, but I think it's, as you say, it's bigger than that.
It's bigger than that. And I was bridled a little bit at the idea of university as trade school, in that you're there. People say, oh, I went for university and I didn't learn to program in this language. I had to learn it after. What use is a computer science degree?
Yeah.
And like, you missed the point.
Yeah, I agree. I fully agree.
Like, it's more than just getting a set of skills.
Yeah.
It's like becoming an adult, quite
yeah.
frankly.
For me, definitely my degree, because it was in dance, those set of skills are immutable, and I love the fact that I got those skills. But when I really look back on it, actually, university is a place that told me, oh, you do like school. You like studying what you want to study, hence why you could go and get an MBA. It was where I had my first real job, which it didn't even connect, that was working in the business office of the Ailey School, which I was like, oh, I love business. It's informed so much more. It's me also recognizing that growing up how we grew up, we had a level of freedom that we didn't realize, in the sense that we used to party from young. We used to be around alcohol from young. There's a lot of things that I think when you get introduced to in university that are not taboo in the Caribbean.
Totally.
That when you go there, they don't affect you. So then you suddenly explore, like you miss that step of being crazy, alcohol fueled, always partying. Like you do a little bit of that, but your integration is suddenly a little bit heightened already, because
Totally.
we've been there, done that. We know what it is like to go to a big 10,000 people foam party.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally. I think I totally agree with you. I think it's the nature, right? You build a wall and people want to climb it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be with my American peers who had like never left home, quite
Yeah.
frankly, and not physically, I'm thinking about in this regard, in their minds. And all of a sudden they let loose and they spend the first years basically like mind blown by this.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that I grew up as I did, where my parents introduced me and were with me when I had these kind of formative adult
Yeah.
experiences, that drinking or whatever else, that it provided kind of an easier glide path onto
Yeah.
this and accept responsibility for yourself
Or
and these kinds of
the
things.
accept responsibility for yourself. Even little things like knowing how to wash your clothes.
I know, it's wild, isn't it?
That is wild.
It is pretty wild. There's a huge statement of privilege as well, right? If you have people who've never washed their clothes, you had a bunch of maids or
But
parents.
also, all of that, but I feel like culturally, we just, even if you had a housekeeper, your mother and father were teaching you how to wash some clothes.
Yeah, totally.
But it's interesting. Anyway, sorry. We digress.
Oh, as we will.
Yes, as we will. But yeah, so MIT.
Yeah, exactly. MIT, as I said, was this kind of, because I can't even describe the sort of change in worldview that being in an institute like that provides, because you're quite, and again, Trinidad now is very connected.
Yeah.
Internet, the world is very connected. We were at the age where it was just entering Trinidad when I left, right?
Oh my gosh. Those are some good times though.
Absolutely. I'm dating myself as we are, but I think it just provided this kind of mind-blowing step up. You felt like you'd plugged your brain into this kind of huge world. So I saw some of that, and so I ran towards it away from Trinidad, because I was thinking, oh, this would be a big new world. I have a lot to do, a lot to learn. But jumping to the end for a second, as you pointed out, especially with family and having family and being a little bit more mature now as an adult, you recognize there is so much value and so many valuable things about growing up in this environment that I took for granted when I was this kind of 17, 18-year-old kid, right? And my kids are going to miss that. They're absolutely going to miss that. The example you pointed out of being raised by this village, they're going to miss that. And I feel a real sadness, actually, for my kids missing that, and also for my family missing that. Because my Trini family will see my kids once a year, maybe. And that's just not enough for them to develop like a really foundational relationship that I had see my grandparents every day. That it's a real challenge.
At least your wife's family is here, right? So they have some of that, at least, which I guess is probably the one kind of placating.
Yeah, no,
It's still difficult, especially because we are so community oriented.
100%.
Kind of people.
100%. I think it's different, right? And you see these cultural differences, and it's always tricky to figure out what's a cultural difference, what's idiosyncratic to these two families, and so on. But I think there is a cultural difference in that regard with Trinis and people who grew up in small countries and so forth, in that people showing up at your house unannounced. That's like not a thing people do here.
I miss that.
Oh, I was driving by your house and I saw the
let me
lights
check
on and I stop and check you.
And
right?
you stand up outside for 10 minutes, you talk for 5, and they're on their merry way.
Totally. These kinds of things that are like very small, but they're actually quite big, as an example of what it means to be in a kind of a smaller community environment.
So you went from MIT, you went into which a company that people have no idea. It's so fundamental in so many things that we do right now. So tell me a little bit about our company, but I definitely want to like fast forward a bit to where we are now and stuff.
Yes, no, I'll get
because
faster
we could get very nostalgic.
Indeed. But I think it was important to say, because basically what happened was going to MIT got slotted into different thing, and then not as much changed, but another important thing was joining a startup company in Boston, Cambridge, called E-Ink. So I was hooked the minute I walked in the door there, because I'd been interviewing with bigger companies and consulting and banking and stuff. But that was like really when I stepped through the door of this startup company, I was like, oh, this is different.
Right.
Founders in rollerblades who are my age, incredibly smart people, meritocratic, flat organization, like just getting SSHHhiiittt done.
Daddy.
I spell everything. Yeah, dad. This is my dad thing. Talking, right? And spell every curse word.
If you wish, you can let it free.
I will now. To reel myself back in when I'm with my kids, though. So, E-Ink ultimately put the screen in the Kindle.
Yeah.
And basically created what is the ebook market that is here today. And now they're taking steps with things like Remarkable, which is a tablet for people who really want to focus on work and so on. So it was like, again, this other formative experience I had from a business perspective, and actually bringing technology to be not just written about in an academic paper.
But to the people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And hooked.
And that's,
Absolutely.
yeah, exactly as you say, hooked. You got hooked on a startup life. You got hooked on that kind of integrating your engineering and your science and making it a real thing, right? Bringing it, as we said, to the people. Then you went into, you did e-ink, and then that was in Boston,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, in
How
the
did you
US.
get here?
I had spent at that stage about a decade in the US,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple of things. I wanted to go to graduate school. So at that stage, I was like, great, next thing I want to be CTO, founder of a startup.
You
That was
just
my next
decided
thing.
off the bat, that was it.
I had spent enough time with people as, I
This is
love
your thing.
technology. What I probably want to do is become co-found something. And I just figured, okay, I need my PhD
Mm-hmm.
if I'm going to do this. And I'd always wanted to do it as a kid even. I was like, wow. So there's still that kid in me
Mm-hmm.
that wants to like be in a white lab coat and blow things up and this kind of stuff, right? So I said, great, go do that. But I'd spent about a decade in the US. So I said, England, I never even been to actually.
Yeah.
But because my parents meeting, getting married here, it occupied this kind of funny space in
Yeah.
my
A little
mind.
romanticized.
Totally, totally. And it happened that there was a very important research group at Cambridge in the space that I was in, that I'd met some of the people. They'd spun out a couple of companies
Okay.
in this space. So I said, this could be interesting actually, in that it's like a really interesting research group. They are entrepreneurial, which was really important to me because I wanted to continue on an entrepreneurial path ultimately. And different countries, so different life experience, etc. So took the luck and ended up here, actually, for
Okay.
graduate school.
And did your PhD?
Did my
What
PhD.
did you get your PhD in?
So it's in the physics department, and it's a group that does what's called organic optoelectronics. Yeah, mouthful.
What does that mean, Jesus?
Yeah, mouthful. I need to at least put it out there, right? So it's on the record. So basically, semiconductors. So the thing that now everybody knows about and
Yeah.
thinks about because of the current battle with China and US about semiconductor manufacturing. But it's a class of semiconductors ultimately that are made with polymers, plastics,
Right.
as I guess we would call it in common parlance. And it was a class of materials that were experimented on for a long time, but this group had really taken a kind of a world leading position in understanding these
Okay.
materials. And so that was why I jumped on it.
Say it again. Organic.
Organic optoelectronics. So optoelectronics is a study
Optoelectronics.
of the optical properties and electronic properties of materials.
Wow.
And organic being organic
Like,
molecules
that
and
just
polymers
tells me
and
the
so
size
on.
of your brain. Oh my gosh. So do I call you Dr. Pinto? Are you officially a
My
Dr.
mother,
Pinto?
yes, I am, but my
Eh,
mother
eh.
calls me that when she wants to make fun of me for being a bit of a nerd.
As I will
But
now. As I will
yeah,
now.
yeah, I don't check the doctor on the form very but yeah,
Okay, so
that
that's
is
what
true.
brought you to the
Yeah,
UK,
it
and then
is.
you
It
found
is.
home,
Indeed.
or new home, I should say.
I didn't intend to stay, right? I thought
Yeah.
I'd be going on
Neither
somewhere
do
else
I. Neither
after the
did I.
PhD, but I think one of my other things is you need to be open in life. Open to experiences, opportunities, people. You never know where a door may close, a window may open. So I was open.
Yeah.
And the next thing that happens, I joined a venture capital firm, right?
Amadeus, right?
Correct, Amadeus Capital. And I had to give a shout out to them for taking a risk on me because I was like a little bit of an oddball profile. Startup person, but techie. And the more typical example is they had people who had basically been product people at startups, come out of business school, and these kinds of things.
Yeah,
So I was like this kind of
financy people.
little bit more finance. I was
Yeah.
a slight oddball, but they took a risk on me, and I'm grateful for that because that also opened another window,
And
or door.
exposure to a whole bunch of new startups in space and
Totally different way of thinking about the world and so
Yeah.
on. So that was
what was some of the vital lessons that you took from being a VC, especially translating into being a founder?
that could fill a book.
Maybe you should be writing a book then.
I don't know about that. What some of the vital lessons? I understood very clearly the motivations of investors to the point where it's like my standard trope. On occasion, I'll give like a talk at a business school or whatever about venture when I was a VC, and I'd always ask the audience, "What's the number one job of VCs?" Okay, what's the only actually not one about the only job of a VC, and you get like to fund innovation.
Yeah.
Yep, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
To back entrepreneurs. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, it's part of it. To support entrepreneurs. Yeah, okay. The only job of a venture capitalist is to make money for their investors.
Yeah, like a banker.
Even
Yeah.
that is it.
Yeah.
That is it. You could be the world's most empathetic entrepreneurial VC. If you don't make money, you're out of business.
True.
You're out of business. Your job is to make money. You're an investor. You're an allocator of capital.
How did you balance that with your nature? Because that's immediately knowing you, that's not your nature, right? To
Indeed,
just
indeed.
think about making money. So how
Indeed,
did you
indeed,
balance
indeed.
that?
I think that is of all of sort of world jobs in the world of finance. That's why venture is the only one that I could have ever done, because, you know, that's the ends,
Right.
but the means are more interesting.
Where you take a
'Cause
company on a journey and
totally, if I were to be a quant at a hedge fund, as lots of my peers in physics have done, or math, it's clearly the thing. There's no illusions. Your job is to understand the markets to make money. Whereas this, yeah, okay, people who know that your job is to make money for investors, but the means are amazing because you work with amazing entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
you're changing markets, you're thinking about changes that technology could bring to society, all this really high-minded stuff at the end of the day. But really, the ends are what's
Yeah.
important. So that to me was like a really important clarifying learning. And I often repeat it to people because it really frames and ultimately explains people's behavior as investors,
Right.
as VCs. Because I think entrepreneurs often get a little bit confused, like,
Yeah.
why is this person doing this? It's like, because
And why they're
they need to
forcing
make
us to
money.
grow when we don't want to grow.
Yeah.
What is your pivot?
Why is
yeah.
this wrong this way? Why
Yeah.
are people investing? So I was like, because their job is to make money. Like all this sort of nice high-minded stuff about entrepreneurship, VC's job is to make money. I think the best VCs keep that back in mind, but are focused on the stuff at hand. Because ultimately, if you drive like the best entrepreneurs and help them see the big opportunity and push them in the right way, etc., then the money will come. The bad ones are the ones who are like just have that in front of their mind all day, every day, and that's all they think about, and that frames every conversation. The good ones are like, okay, this is where we need to be, but let's think about making the company
Let's
amazing.
do the journey.
Let's think about
make
making the company
happen.
amazing, and the money will come.
So you spent like 10 years at Amadeus.
A decade, yeah.
Left as a director.
Partner, but whatever.
Partner,
it is,
sorry.
Some difference.
And now then you went and co-founded your business Pace, which you've successfully sold to
Yes.
Flyr. So
Yes.
now called Flyr.
Yes.
And one of the things that you all were doing, and you had mentioned to me, you wanted to use machine learning to navigate pricing and to work with demand pricing. And now, as everyone is talking about AI and it's at the forefront of the world, that you feel like you were the folks sitting on your surfboards. And I loved that analogy, like sitting on your surfboards, waiting on, know the swell is coming and just waiting on everyone else to come out and meet you. What has that, and that's also the time that I met you, which we have to tell our story because it's one of my absolute favorite stories ever.
It's so good.
But yeah, so what made you want to go and create this new company?
Yeah, so I did life backward in some ways, in that most people enter venture after they've started a couple of companies
Yeah.
and so on. I was at a startup, but I hadn't started one. And while I was doing venture, I felt, oh man, I should go out and do something startup-y, because I missed being with the builders.
In the
VC is
building part.
Yeah, like VC is really interesting, but I missed being with builders, quite frankly, people building stuff, engineers, people selling product, etc., creating products. So I missed that, and so that always at the back of my mind. And once I started seeing machine learning actually coming good, this was the era of DeepMind creating
Right.
AlphaGo that beat Lisa Doll at Go.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, there's something here. This is going to be a huge change. So I said, okay, this is the time. This is really the time I need to get out of doing venture and start something up. And so I really had the interest to start something that deployed machine learning, or AI, as we call it in common parlance, to be at the core of what we're doing. So build an AI-first company, basically, is what I wanted to do. And I always had this kind of little list in my head of people that I would be interested in starting companies with, right? Because you look for people who have complementary skill sets, people who you can argue with,
Yeah.
but go to the bar and have a beer with later.
Yep.
That's like super important to me. And so there was always this list of people I was like, okay, I can speak truth with these people and nobody's going to
Yeah.
get hurt by it. And etc. But they're amazing people, right? Like I need to feel intimidated ultimately by the people I'm with, right? I need to feel like I'm the dumb one in the room. These people are amazing in anything I do. And so there were a bunch of people like that. And so Jens Monk, who's my co-founder at Pace, was one of them. He had been at Google and so forth and had been really quite an amazing guy in what he had done there. And he brought this idea of price because he was at Izettle at the time and he worked with lots of retailers and they had quite, let's just say manual. I could be less generous, but manual ways of setting price.
And also, I guess for us, engaging with price is quite a static thing. Like when the price change on something, you're getting vexed. Like the whole the egg madness that we've gone through recently. Like the price of eggs increasing is problematic.
Totally.
So yeah, I get that. I get why it was probably manual, as you say.
Manual and actually is a huge, again, fill a book with this, but it's actually partly down to the creation of formalized retail. Actually, if you think about it, we have had dynamic pricing since commerce began. I'm talking about somebody going to a market and buying eggs from a vendor who's selling at a market. That person selling eggs has a price in their mind that they'd like to achieve, and they're selling at a price that will basically maximize their profit, okay? But they do it in a very dynamic way, but is all driven by what ultimately were interpersonal dynamics, right? I'm using fancy language. A vendor at a stall 200 years ago selling eggs in a village, they're going to change the price.
True. And that's what bartering is about as well, right?
They're going to change the price depending on the time of day, how many eggs they have, the person they're selling to. So we have always had informal retail that has always been dynamic price. You go, nowadays still, you go to any developing market, Trinidad, you name it. You go to a market, you go to any of the souks in Turkey, whatever. You're going to negotiate with someone about price,
I think
right?
you don't think about the negotiation in that sense because where you're coming from is you're building a business on this thing that then I'm looking at the price. You know what I mean? Like when I'm thinking about pricing, I think about that thing that on the grocery it's on the tag and that's the price.
Yes.
As opposed to I'm going to the market and I'm going to talk to the stall vendor and be like, oh God, come the man.
Yes.
You could see that these going to take a little while. Like that
Totally.
whole conversation and context is so true. Like it never...
Totally.
You don't associate it in that way. Like
you go to Columbia Road Flower Market. You go to Columbia Road Flower Market here, and you're like, friend, you want to go home.
Out just now.
Exactly. You want to go home in 10 minutes, friend. That bouquet.
Yeah.
You know, that is dynamic pricing. That is dynamic pricing. It's just person to person. And then, of course, once we had formalized retail, big stores, etc., a static price was like basically more convenient for that. So I think that was the kind of paradigm change that we expect over time to happen, which is this kind of recapturing of dynamic pricing to be a real tool for retail and consumers and so on. Anyway, that's a long, boring story. I was super interested in machine learning, AI.
Yeah.
Jens said, price is actually a really interesting problem to apply it to. Let's go off and do this. So
it was that simple.
Basically. Right market, big enough market to go after with, right
Which
people to start it
hospitality.
with. Ultimately hospitality, right? So we started applying it ultimately to hotel groups.
Right, which makes absolute sense. When you think about like vacancy, occupancy.
Yeah, all that stuff, exactly. And the fact that the hospitality tends to be an industry that does not adopt technology at the front of the line, right? They tend to be a little bit laggards in technology adoption. Coming and applying this technology would have helped change this industry. So yeah, like big market, importantly founders. So our other co-founders, guy John Paul Clark, who's Jamaican. So 2 Caribbean guys and a Swedish guy.
Walk into a bar.
Indeed, exactly. With the priest and the rabbi next to JP at the time was a professor at Georgia Tech. So he brought the technology ultimately and the science that was at the core of what we did. And we were off to the races with the three of us to found the company.
And how many years later now?
So we founded in 2017, and in 2022, we sold the company to a US-based company called Flyr. So Flyr ultimately did what we did, which is dynamic pricing and optimization for airlines. So we did it for hospitality, did it for airlines. Bob's your uncle. We did it together for cross-travel and transport. Led by a very charismatic, impressive founder, Alex Mans. And Alex and I had a chat at some point, and as we were finishing each other's sentences, because these markets are very similar, right? The airline industry is about the same size as hospitality,
Yeah.
actually, but has the same challenges from a kind of a optimization standpoint, and also from a standpoint of using technology is quite old.
Even though you hope that the airline industry is at the forefront of technology, considering that it's a metal tube in the air.
Yeah, I know. It's yes and no. It definitely is ahead of the
Aeronautics wise, I'm
hospitality
sure they're at the front of
piece.
everything.
Yeah,
Current
yes.
Boeing situations aside.
I know. But from a software and system
Yeah.
standpoint, it's not. Sabre and Amadeus are the household names in that space, and it's basically been a duopoly for a long
Right.
time, which doesn't motivate people to innovate and
Yeah.
keep investing in cutting edge technology.
So we met. So you just said 2017, and that just timed it for me. I feel like we met in 2018ish, and as I say, our story is one of my favorite ever
The same.
meetings. And do you want to tell it or shall I tell it?
I'll tell half, and you
Okay.
tell the other half.
Okay.
The context. So we were. I'm trying to remember how many people. We must have been about 10, 15 people in the company at this point. Had a really crappy office, which I liked.
Just on Old Street,
Exactly, just above the Oaxaca in Old Street.
Paul Street, and whatever that other triangle, that little triangle thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I loved that office because too many people get the entrepreneurial light experience, which is like immediately in fancy offices.
Ping pong
and
tables,
yeah,
beanbags,
exactly. I'm
da-da-da.
like, no, we had to build a company. And this is serious business. And it was like a crappy office. And it was
Yeah.
cheap. And I liked that. It was hot during the summer. We had to bring in fans and so forth. So I liked that stage of our life. And the other implication of that was we didn't have fancy meeting rooms. Okay. We had a small kitchen that fit 4 people. And that was where we had a conference
Okay.
table. Yeah. It was hilarious. So what we ended up doing a lot was we would take walk-in meetings.
Oh, see, I didn't know that context.
Yeah, we take walk-in meetings. So we have 5-minute meeting. Okay, let's go outside and just walk around the block and talk. Okay, because I do have a conference room, so you got to. So I was having a chat with our then CTO.
Oh, and here comes Zara. So my side story is I was on the other side of that triangle. On the Paul Street side, I was working at a health tech agency at the time. And I will never forget that it was one of those weird things that I always used to leave my headphones on my desk when I came into the office because it's like the first thing I'm going to put back on when I'm walking out the office. And that day, I purposely picked them up and put them in my backpack, which I had never done before. Leave the office, backpack on. I was like, oh, shit, my headphones. Oh, well, I'll listen to the world around me. So I'm walking to the tube to go home. And behind me, I hear this Trinidadian accent. And I'm walking going, oh, that's really nice to hear. I'm not even hearing what you're saying, but just hearing the lilt and just being like, oh, man, home. And I just turned around and someone was like, I'm so sorry. I just heard this accent and I wanted to say it's really nice to hear a piece of home at Old Street. And then you tell me your name and we introduce ourselves and you're like, I'm Jason Pinto. I was like, I know that name. And literally the job that I had just started, the job before this one, I had met the investors and, oh my gosh, Sitar, yeah?
Probably. It's probably
Yes.
Sitar.
I'd met the investor and she's, oh, I know this Trinidadian, da-da-da, you should meet him. I was like, okay, cool. And that was literally only 6 months before that. And in that time, I'd also, one of my friends, Njamile, had met you. And she's like, you should meet this guy, Jason Pinto. And I was like, oh, yeah, totally. Da-da, and keep on moving. They're like, he's a Trini. I feel like y'all would connect. And I was like, yeah, cool. Well, introduce me when you can. No worries. And then I heard this name. I was like, I know this name. And oh no, it couldn't have been 2018. It would have been 2019.
Later, I think it was later.
Because lo and behold, I had spent Christmas with your whole family.
Exactly.
And we met like in February. And
Exactly.
I had just come back from home and I spent this lovely Christmas in Tobago with my family. And Jason's family was with us the whole time. Literally spent Christmas morning with your family, which was so wild. And then we randomly meet on the street, all because you were taking walking meetings and I left my headphones out. And it's been great. And also for me, you said earlier in our chat that you walking into the space at E-Ink, it was this thing where you were like, I was not the smartest one in the room. every time I sit with you, I feel that way. And it's not a bad thing. It is so not a bad thing. It's inspiring. It's motivating. In a way, I look at you as a semi-mentor, but in a really nice, comfortable way.
Cool.
Because there's so much that you have to give and learn from.
Amazing.
And
Thank you.
And also you have this great energy about you. So it's really nice. And it helps that like our mothers know each. It's so
Totally.
weird. But it's such a good story.
It's an amazing story. In fact, I'll give you the third part of the story.
Oh, yeah?
So I give the first, you give the second.
Okay.
I was speaking to my mom like a week after we ran into each other, and you emailed me, and I was like, oh, Mom, I met this like really great Trinity girl actually in London. Fun story, we ran into each other. And I said, yeah, like, I don't, she's like, she used to be a dancer. She's an amazing dancer, professional. And my mom's, wait, what? She said, hold on. So my mom hangs up, calls me back. She says, I just talked to her mother. It's like,
Just hold on, just let me talk to her about it real quick.
exact. So funny. It's a
So,
small world, but there you go.
Yeah, it's a small world, and that's what's lovely about Trinidad as well. And I think that whole community and village. Okay, so that's our lovely, amazing meeting story. But so now you built Pace, and you have all this amazing experience from before, watching a lot of other founders go through it. Like, how do you CEO and how do you be a founder? What are those things that you think make it happen?
Gosh, yeah. So that learnings from the experience and things that may be worthwhile sharing would be how I would codify that. So founding and finding the sort of first set of customers was hard. No question about that. And making sure everybody's pointing in the same direction and running up the same hill ultimately.
Yeah.
Is one of the sort of key things about what I do day to day and what I think is the job of someone internally focused, which the COO often is, like an internally focused executive. So making sure people are running up the same hill and focused, and making sure company culture actually is kind of creating the right outcomes is really core to what I think is one of the key jobs of a founder. Right? In that so often you see like really crap company cultures that ultimately lead to a negative outcome, like the end, basically. Because I always say that company culture, very seldom do you find it tested when times are good.
It's true.
Money is free, companies getting funded, everybody's happy. You get a real test of culture when things are bad. Okay? And for us, that was COVID. Because we were selling into hospitality groups, hotel groups.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay. And fateful story, sort of February 2020. I'm getting like messages from people I know who touch the Chinese market, and they're like, this thing looks pretty serious actually. Like China shut down, and as maybe it could be like SARS, just a kind of a thing that affects
Very
Asia.
isolated in that sense.
Affects Asia, doesn't, so the Asian market be a mess, but maybe we'll be spared. So we kept watch of it, but of course by March, game over. We knew what was happening, and we basically 80% of our revenue went away overnight. So we had to take pretty tough actions. We had to cut the team, which is never fun, even if it's for a reason that is outside of your purview. It's never fun to have to cut the team for the people that are being cut. There was some incredible sociopathic behavior during that time, right? Of CEOs getting on calls with half the company and saying, you people on the call, you're
Have
gone.
a good life.
Good.
Yeah.
And this is really hard on me, the CEO cutting. I'm like, no, like it's the people. Like, what? So yeah, let me make it very clear. It's hard on the people, not nearly as hard on the person doing the cutting. So we had to really hunker down, right? As well as the fact that people are worried about their families, worried about their parents, their grandparents. So it was like an incredible test of society. A lot of our societies failed at these tests of families, tests of companies, tests of company culture. So it's this multi-tier test. And as I said, like it was a real test of our company because we had no money. We were like, oh, we're not going to survive this because the industry has shut down.
We didn't know what the end was going to look like.
We had no idea when this
That
thing was
must
going
have
to
been
end,
so scary.
right? It was really a tough time. And we luckily, again, luck has a part to play in any of these outcomes. We luckily had investors who supported us. We took proactive action to really cut our costs deeply, like as fast as we could and as deeply as we could without cutting into bone. And the backside of that, looking back, you're like, actually, that was a real test of us. There's a test about metal, a test about culture, a test about grittiness. Because that to me is like one of the key things. Like people really need to be gritty.
Yeah.
You need to put your knife between the teeth and wade through mud and other substances to get to the finish line
Yeah.
here. Like starting a company is not child's play. So that to me is one of the key learnings, like grit, like toughness, weathering really difficult times is something that I think people often forget when times are good and money is easy to get by, venture capital is easy to come by.
Yeah.
People often forget that, no, this is like your competitors are trying to kill you. It's not clear your product is wanted in the market. You have tons of competition for the people you've hired if they're any good. It's hard. So,
And obviously, we know the end result. It all ended up okay. But what, like, when you say you cut and you did really deep cuts, what does those deep cuts look like?
very practically, at the end of the day, you have a spreadsheet that shows your burn rate. You have X amount of cash in the bank. You have a burn rate. It says we have how many months of cash left before we have to shut the company down, right? So it was too short.
Right.
It was too short. Even if we thought the pandemic would end in a couple of months, like this is way too short. So we had to basically make the equations work and end up with a year and a half of runway, as the expression goes. Only way to do that is to cut our costs. So we had to cut the team. So
Because that's your biggest expense.
that is your biggest
Because
expense.
everyone was home by now. You didn't have an office space.
Correct. So salaries is the biggest expense. So you have to find a way to cut that. And that means cutting people. So calling people up and saying, with regret, we have to part ways. And there is no easy way to do that. And no.
Yeah. And how does a small company, because y'all were still small, how does a small company do that or also support their people through that? Because I also know your nature and you definitely were not going to try to support your people.
Yeah, it's also hard in that you try to do it in a kind of a humane way, right? So again, like there was lots of sociopathy on display during the pandemic,
It was wild.
right? I mean, so you have to address this tough question directly. Treat a person like an adult, as they are. But at the end of the day, you have to basically open your Rolodex and open your kimono to any support you can give them to find the next gig ultimately. Because people need to eat, need to get jobs. So that was what we did basically. We had to cut people, and then we said, look, here's a group of people. You tell me whether you want me to share your CV with these people. Who should I call for you?
Yeah.
You go spend time on my LinkedIn. I'll introduce you to anyone that you want from my LinkedIn.
And that's like a really, for lack of a better word, cost-effective way of supporting people.
For sure.
Because a company of your size would not have necessarily, if cost was the thing, you weren't able to then be like, and we'll continue with your dental. And I'm sure if you could, you probably did as well. But like just that opening of your network and that grace and going, I will help the community and the village part again.
Correct.
I guess that's the most sensible and empathetic way that you could, if you don't have bags of money to be like, we will pay for this and we'll pay for that. And
Obviously, it would be great if I could say, great, here's 6 months
Yeah.
severance, so you could find a job, 6 months pay.
Yeah.
We can do that. So every non-cash way I could to support somebody, I would.
yeah,
Again, make no mistake about it. The hard thing is for the person, not for me. So I don't want to feel
Yeah.
like I'm asking for sympathy for this. But so it's really for the person that's been laid off, what is the sort of most kind of useful thing I could do for them
yeah.
to get them on the path to their next job? That's it.
I have so many questions now to follow. But I guess my other question there is, I know you don't want to censor yourself because you said it's not about you, but also to be able to give that and give that non-cash, because the cash way is the easy way, right? You could wash your hands of someone in that way, but if you're doing it any way that you did, how do you find time for you in that, and also in the madness of the period that we were going through?
For sure. But I will fully admit that I was straight up depressed during that time, right? First of all, the world was going through how many
through it.
millions killed, right? So if you're not feeling a kind of a despair at that time, wow.
Sociopathy.
There you go. There you go, the sociopaths out there. So I was like, oh my God, like there's a lot of people dying. There's a lot of people dying in this. This is terrible. And then as well, seeing like a lot of my immediate friends, co-workers going through very difficult times as well. even if they didn't have, some did, but even if they didn't have people in their network who were not well, a lot of people were isolated.
Yeah.
So we knew there was going to be this big social cost to this lockdown and isolation and so on. And I felt that for people, but I also felt that person because I love being around people. I really do. Even in the remote work environment that we're in, I still go into an office because I like being around people, right? I gain energy from being around people. So being locked down, I was depressed during that time, right? And as well thinking, oh, this thing I've helped start is going to go bust. That's not a great context for, so I was straight up depressed during that time. And
But also you just had a baby.
I had also just had a child.
So much.
My wife just had a
And I
child.
really
So
think, wow.
we didn't know what we were doing. Oh, sure, we read all the books and got all the advice, but you don't really know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And because of that, you're like, anything you do is going to negatively affect this child. So we had a whole heap load of stress and worries during that time. But if I haven't said it enough, my wife is a rock. She's chiseled out of the hardest substance known to man. So she is the reason that we pulled through this, I have to say, as a family.
Wow.
Because she's incredibly strong. One of the most empathetic human beings I know. Okay. And so she is like an antenna. She absorbed a ton of the stress of that time and just like, all right, we're going to get through this. It'll be fine. And she was like an incredibly calming and powerful influence.
Wow.
on
All
me
while
during
breastfeeding and all the things of being a new mom. I mean, we like Superwoman is a real thing.
Yep, for sure. And it's like the kind of boring cliche of the woman behind the man thing. So I hate to fall into that stereotype, but she really is like the reason that we survive this as a family and we survive this as a business, quite frankly, because,
So, like, coming out on the other side, what are so many things that you did, one, for yourself, but also for Pace? Spoiler alert, get sold successfully. What are some of the actions that you had to take to come out on the other side of this madness?
Yeah. So I'll speak briefly personally for a minute and then more about business. You, I suppose it comes with age, you know the things you need, basically, and you should have kind of self-care routines, things that you need to help get you through stress, difficult times, etc. Mine is like exercise and a little bit of routine. So like things like I get up at the same time every morning, get like a reasonable amount of sleep, which is hard with a growing family and work, but I need to do it on occasion. Regular exercise, etc. So these kind of slightly trite things make a difference. So I found that. As a business, try and stay connected to people. Still, I have a little slot in my calendar, which is just a slot to call people up on the team.
Nice.
Literally, just like I end the meeting early, I just call somebody up. Now, it's quite funny
I was
because...
going to say, how do they respond?
Yeah, now I think people are a bit used to it on the team.
Okay.
But at the start, people are like, why is Jason calling me? Is Jason calling me at bad news? So, but I think conversation is important, connectivity is important, especially when people are working remotely. This kind of human connection that you develop through being in an office that we haven't quite found a great substitute yet in a remote world. I think just calling somebody up is an approximate substitute for that, right? So I call people up and be like, what are you working on? How's your day? Like, is your husband's business doing all right? Like, how's the kids? This kind of just small talk. So the structural stuff of connecting regularly, we actually used to meet in parks. Pandemic, you can't be in an office. So we're like, great, let's go meet at Hyde Park. So we met as a team in Hampstead at one point. And
that would have been the best time to go as well. It would have been so quiet and peaceful. And
correct. So we did stuff like that because we knew we needed human connectivity, I think is a kind of a very underrated part of building a team and connecting and so on. So we did that as a business, quite frankly, and continued in some ways to do that. But then the other thing is just try and be real with people. Everybody, I think there's a little bit sometimes of we infantilize people, right? But you treat people like adults. Here's the money we have. Here's the runway. This is the situation, folks. I'm going to be transparent with you. I'm going to treat you like the adult you are. People appreciate that. You also, of course, have to, people who maybe it's their first job, never worked at a startup, you have to give some context, right? So this is having 9 months of runway is actually okay.
A lot can happen in 9 months as well.
Tons of stuff can happen in 9 months, right? I think you need to provide the right context for people. Otherwise, some people get fixated and focused on that,
Yeah.
and that causes more stress.
And I guess
So-
with your VC experience, like you had that understanding and that clarity.
Yeah.
So you probably would have been the ideal co-founders to have to navigate. Like working with you would have been ideal in that sense because you have such a breadth
Yeah.
of exposure and you understand the difference between the grit and the brain and the heart and the
Yeah.
bringing all those things together.
Jens gave me a high compliment the other day after we presented like a board meeting. He says, you, Jason, and I was like, is this a compliment? I was like, okay. He says, you have this incredibly calming way about you.
You do.
And he said, like, that actually is like very valuable because people trust you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably one of the things that I learned on a lot during the pandemic, which is this is a really shit time. Okay? Once in 100 years shit time. We worry about whether we're going to be killed by this virus. So forget like whether we have money and whether we can go back to an office, like really existential stuff. Let's like close the noise out of the world and just be calm for a minute. He said like, yeah, that was maybe your superpower. Let's see.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah.
Speaking of superpowers, what kind of tools does someone who wants to be a founder and or CEO kind of need, do you think?
Yeah, so founder, let's start there. Grit. I think I said it 10 times already. Like, it's a hard thing, right? Like, I know lots of people who are just going through the pains of trying to raise money and it's like banging their heads against a wall, right? I think there's a kind of a success bias to storytelling in the startup world. At what hits the front page of TechCrunch and the FT is people raising $100 million. 99.9% of companies and experiences aren't like that.
And also for underrepresented founders.
90.9999999.
Yeah.
Right? If you happen to be black, gay, a woman, like different,
Yeah.
all this, it's even worse, multiple times worse. So having that grit and being able to continue to be positive, right? Push ahead, but try things like, because you're in experimentation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So grittiness, self-criticality, you need to be able to listen to yourself and improve every time you tell a story. That's really hard. Take feedback while staying a course.
Yeah.
Like so all these kinds of things I think are super important in the kind of founder mindset. And there's enough academic literature and so forth written about that. I would say as a COO, it's a funny job in that it's quite a poorly defined job. Okay? You tell someone that you're a VP of sales at a company, it's pretty obvious what you do. Okay? Yeah, like sell more shit. Lead a team, but you sell more shit, right?
Yeah.
Every COO I know does a different job. Some CEOs have salespeople reporting to them. Some CEOs have finance and they're very financially focused. Some CEOs are very focused on company structure and organization and so on, right? So I think it's a job that changes with stage of company, changes with company as well. Every different company has a different need that the CEO kinds of fills. So I think adaptability is like a hugely valuable thing in COOs, and that you need to adapt to gaps in the leadership team, situational gaps, right? I need to go and fill this gap. Customer success having a challenge. I need to go and help them figure that out. The people team it's a real kind of gap filler role in some regards. But ultimately, I tell people that the principal job of the CEO is making sure the ships are running on time, the trains are running on time, I should say, right? Make sure that the company is executing at its top level. And whatever you need to make that happen,
Is what you do.
you do.
We just talked about really briefly on the whole funding situation. And Pace, you weren't necessarily one of those headline grabbing fundraising rounds, right? You were funded, which is a great thing, but not a headline grabbing fundraising round. If you had to look back on it, how would you approach the navigating building a company with limited funds, decent amount, but limited? How would you kind of engage with that tussle?
How would I have done it differently, I guess we're asking? What would I have done differently? This is a useful question, actually, because you're always back testing your decisions, right? What did I do right? What did I do wrong in this regard? I would say you can never spend enough time with customers.
Okay.
Never. No minute with a customer is a minute wasted. And so I would always go back and say, I should have spent more time with customers. We should have spent more time understanding our customer challenges, understanding the customer journey, right? So that is something that I think I wish we had done better.
And in a sense, I would then build a better product, more
Build-
customers,
build
makes
better
more money.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's exactly. Build a better product, which means you have better market traction and so on. So that's even someone who's perfect at this, you can always be better at spending time with customers. So that's important. Marketing, I'd say we didn't do enough of early enough. Probably still don't do enough of. And I think, quite frankly, American companies, big generalization here, but I think American companies generally do this better.
Yeah, but I think that's such a cultural thing, right? Like America, frankly, and yes, it is a generalization, but they're better at bragging. British
100%.
culture they're so
Understated
and you can't brag, and humility and even though it's all false,
Yes.
but I think that's literally why.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's a real deep-seated cultural thing, and I think we needed to have been better at that, which ultimately is a proxy of connecting with customers, right?
Yeah.
Because you're marketing to a potential customer. So understanding the customer story, and it's essentially repeating it to them, right? Slotting in how you can solve this problem is what marketing is ultimately, right? So we could have been better at that and spent more time with that and focus on that, etc. So I'd say those are probably the things that I wish that I could have done better. But it's in some ways obvious in that I am a techie to a fault. So you tend to fall back on things that you like and are good at, right? We're just talking engineers and product and so on. And my natural home is not in marketing and sales and commercial. And you push yourself and be better at the things you're not great at naturally.
And what about the things when it comes to spending that funding that you received? Is there anything what are the things you think you did well, and what do you think you would have done differently, after you got that funding itself?
So from our seed rounds and so forth, first of all, I don't think we were profligate. Like, I don't look back and say, oh gosh, we shouldn't have gotten that gold-plated coffee machine. I don't really have any qualms about how we spent our money, quite frankly. I think there's always a question to me.
Let's just clarify, you did not get a gold-plated coffee machine. No.
We did not.
Let's just
We did
make
not
sure
get a
folks don't be
gold-plated.
like, that's what they
not.
be doing.
We did not. We got a coffee machine. It was nice, but we did not get a gold-plated one. So I don't perceive us as having misallocated capital or anything like that. I've seen it.
Which is probably why you didn't, though, because you would have had, once
sure.
again, all that amazing experience of watching other companies before and investing in them and helping them.
And I'm a cheap guy by nature.
I reckon it's probably more frugal than cheap.
Thank you. You put a $20 word when a $1 word will do. I'm a cheap guy. My family have to encourage me to change my clothing because they're like, dude, those trousers, you need to go and buy some clothes.
It's time.
It's time.
But the other day you were saying that you had to convince your mom to redecorate the bathrooms.
It is a family-worn thing. My family are cheap and it's good. It's good.
Listen, the money have to last long. People, we are living longer.
Somewhere. Correct. I learned frugality somewhere, right? So thank you, Mom. So I don't, as I said, I don't perceive us having misallocated capital in that regard. I would say we could have spent more capital for commercial and marketing and so forth, but I don't think so. But what I was getting to was fundraising. There is always this kind of tug of war about how much time you should spend fundraising.
Yeah.
And it is an adage which is always be fundraising.
Okay. That sounds very tiring.
Oh, it's hard. Having been on both sides, I recognize now it's really hard to be always fundraising.
Yeah.
But what it really means is, I tell people, fundraising is essentially a sales exercise. Okay? You have a pipeline of prospects that your salespeople are going after. You work them from all angles, right? And you're constantly reorganizing your pipeline to see which lead is moving forward, which one is slow, which you have a lot of kind of tactics you use to manage your pipeline and so forth that are well known in the sales industry. Fundraising is essentially the same, except what you're selling is shares in your company ultimately, and the audience of prospects are VCs and investors. You need to be thinking about it in that regard, but it's really a question of how much time you spend doing it and whether it's productive. Okay? And
how do you determine if it's productive? Because like you were saying, also you never know when one door opens or window closes. How can you feel like, yes, this is a productive... Is there a way to figure it out?
First of all, Every meeting you have with an investor, you should ask, have we moved the ball forward here? Am I closer to getting to a yes here? Just ask explicitly,
Yeah.
because I don't want to waste your time or my time. If this is going to end in a no, we should not waste our time, because both of our times are valuable, right? So you can be straight up with people and say, are we making progress towards a yes here? And if you've done enough, you get the sense, again, with selling product, you have this thing of deal momentum. You can feel when conversation is progressing, when you're moving, when you have like engagements, etc. You get the same with investors. If an investor's like a little bit like, I don't have time this next week, could we talk week after? Something's slowing in this process. I don't get the sense that we have momentum here, and that matters. So it's hard.
You have to read people, basically.
Totally. You have to read the situation, read people, and get a sense of whether you're getting momentum to a yes. But it takes time. There's no way to avoid that. And we spent a lot of time doing it. We were close to closing a Series A when we decided to sell the company. But it wasn't easy.
How do you make that decision to sell?
Yes. And we were in a privileged position that we basically had a Series A ready to go when we decided to take the M&A route instead. So we literally had two options. Very often in life, you have a possibility of option B and a real concrete option A. Very seldom do you have two concrete options, right? And we did in this case, which was like great and lucky and so on.
Can I ask real quick, when you say you had a Series A ready to go,
Yes.
what does that kind of mean?
Term sheet signed,
Oh, okay.
legals in process.
So identified your funders, had those conversations, did the pitch. They were like, yeah, we're happy to give you some cash.
Did due diligence, all this kinds of
Okay,
stuff.
so you essentially went through the funding round.
Yeah. So we had a pretty big Series A, and it made it like first of all, it made it a concrete A/B option. So
Real
couldn't
nice
have hoped.
problem to
Yeah,
have.
it's really optionality. As I always say, being an entrepreneur is really about generating optionality. You want to have options. Do we take the company forward this way, that way? Who do we hire? We have 3 options for hiring people to fill this role. Like, you want to generate optionality for any of the decisions you have, right? So that was a situation where we had some optionality, which was like amazing. Then came like many late night conversations with Jens, co-founder, investors, because our key VCs had obviously a very important stake in this conversation.
Yep.
About whether we continue on as independent or we join up with Flyr and take that path. Pros and cons with each. Some of the obvious ones, obviously, I have a boss now.
Yeah.
Okay, so you give the independence. You curtail some part of the entrepreneurial journey in that regard. But Flyr has very deep-pocketed investors. They're US headquartered. They're at serious scale already. So we would skip some of the stages of evolution.
Skipped a bunch of growing pains in a sense.
Absolutely.
But created different types of growing pains.
100%. And again, not telling any tales here because the front page of any M&A textbook, but you have a small company merging with a big company.
Yeah, you get eaten essentially.
Yeah, you're eating. There's cultural changes that you have to merge. We're bought by some 100-year-old company with sclerotic, still a startup, hard charging and led by an entrepreneur. So lots of very positive check boxes.
Do you think it helps that geographically you're separated?
Good question. I would say that it actually doesn't help from a kind of a general M&A standpoint in that I think this is one of the challenges that entrepreneurs in the UK and Europe have, in that most tech buyers are US based and people tend to buy locally. To come across the pond to a different culture, different geography and buy, it's hard. Okay?
Including all the legalese, the jurisdiction
100%,
stuff, all of that.
100%. Cultural, there's cultural differences. How do you integrate the team when they're geographically separate? All these kinds of things reduce the likelihood that the acquisition will be successful. So people know that. So people in Silicon Valley buy startups based in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, right? Because it's more likely you know the people, right? Etc. It's harder that we were here and they were there. But I think you're probably right that because we're geographically separate, we somehow have a little bit of maintenance, some independence, and a little bit of original culture and so on. Yeah. I think one thing that is helpful is Alex, the CEO, is actually Dutch. Lived in the US for a very long time, but I think he's a very sharp guy. but he's a good code switcher. And he knows Europeans, he's European. It's really helpful in that regard.
All of this amazing life experience, right? When it comes down to it, you mentioned luck, you mentioned grit. Obviously, we know there's brain. Like, if you had to separate it into the pie or give it percentages through your career, and knowing that you have a huge brain, but through your career, how much of it do you think is luck, grit, heart, brain?
Wow, that is a hard question. That's a really hard question. Gosh. I think here's the thing. I have to think through my own experience with other people who are in similar situations. Some of whom were smarter, but weren't as gritty. Some of whom were way tougher, but maybe not smart. I don't know. It's a really hard question to ask and answer, excuse me. I really think grit is a huge component of it. Like, just being tough matters so much, because no matter how smart you are, no matter how lucky you are, life is going to throw obstacles in your way.
True.
Some people are lucky in that they have few obstacles. Some people are unlucky in having a huge amount, but that doesn't matter, right? Life is going to throw obstacles in your way, and we have to be tough. You have to be tough to overcome them.
Yeah.
Okay? So I put that pretty high up on the list of attributes that lead to success. Luck, divine intervention, take it what you will.
Being open to the universe, as you said before.
Hugely important. And intellectual horsepower matters. No question about that. Matters. But I suppose as a young pup, all that mattered was getting an A on a test. I would say what I mean by intellectual horsepower is a bit broader than that. In that, yeah, there's the A on the test bit, but there is a kind of a human side to being smart that I don't think is well quantified by tests as we have test taking, that comes out in startups and business and so forth, that I find a kind of a hard thing to pin down. It's something about people who are smart but maybe can communicate an idea, can read people. There's a kind of a smartness that, again, is not well measured by our kind of test-taking industry.
I think you have that intelligent horsepower bang on, dude, and I'll give you the reason why I say that. So I sent pre-interview questions so I could have a nice understanding, and you highlighted that I would like to make sure we talk about, and I think we've hit all of them in different ways: life and balancing, and also being a founder with limited funds, etc. And you said, I reference this article quite often, and it's an article in The Atlantic about why women can't have it all.
Yes.
And I think that that encapsulates it really well about being intelligent and recognizing there's all these structural things and things that we need to navigate, but you're looking at it from an empathetic view. And you're also looking at it from a female's perspective. So
Yes.
also recognizing your privilege as a male, all of those
Totally.
things. And I think that there encapsulates what you're talking about with your intelligence horsepower of having the brain and the smarts, but understanding that it needs to be relatable and understand context and the human side of it all.
100%. I really think there's a kind of a smartness about people, maybe,
Yeah.
and situations and so forth, that I think is super important as well to lead to like how you navigate life and opportunity.
And does that connect to your heart piece?
I guess ultimately in that you can't, there's some things you really can't fake.
Yeah.
And being like, telling someone, I actually really feel it for you. This is a shit situation. I'm not going to make it easier by what I say, for example. You can't fake that because people see through that kind of thing pretty easily. Insincerity is like a killer. So actually bringing your heart to the situation of being a robot, I think is pretty important too. Because another kind of important thing as a founder is you have to inspire people, in that people who are just doing this for being coin operated to get a payoff at the end of the day.
And there are a few of those.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
There are a few
For
of
sure,
those.
for sure. But that it's not likely that you're going to be able to inspire people, because this is not a coin operated process, right? You have to, at some point, do some things and have some situations where you may not be well paid, you may not, you have to put your whole self into it and make sure that other people see that. And yeah, I did want to point out one thing, though, that article has a clickbaity title.
It totally does. But from my perspective, it was about the fact that it wasn't even necessarily the whole context of the article per se, but the fact that you were taking it from the other perspective as well.
100%. So it's not that I think, and for people who haven't read the article, it's not that Jason Pinto here is saying that women can't have it all. Like,
no, oh yes, that is
just
true.
to make that very clear. That was written by a very powerful woman who
Mm-hmm.
talks about the fact that you have to be privileged, have a lot of money, have a supportive partner, have a kind of
There's
a
a lot of
setup.
things that need to come into play for you
Huge
to
number of
try and have
things.
it all.
Huge number of things. And part of context I have for that is that I think that is the case with starting a company, being an entrepreneur.
So we have what I can now call a tradition, because I'm getting into these episodes of closing with what I now call Lipton Tea Time for multiple reasons. One, James Lipton from inside the Actors Studio always asks these questions. But before we get into the Lipton questions, you mentioned that you don't have a 20-year plan.
Yeah.
And I think that makes sense, especially in this world that we live in right now. Anything could fly, right?
Indeed.
But do you have a plan even for what is Jason going to do next?
Yeah, that's a big question, actually. And I mentioned I don't have a 20-year plan to you and build up to this, and that I think a lot of people from when we were taught said, okay, in 20 years I'll be doing this.
Yeah.
And as I don't have this kind of very rigid kind of view of the future. I just want to be in a place where I'm around very smart people, doing something that I think is needle-moving, interesting, and taking on a kind of interesting challenge, right? Something that'll get me out of bed every day to work hard.
Important.
Super important. That's it's a very nebulous answer, but that is what I'd like to continue doing. There's, a lot. I guess this is the privilege of being a little bit older now. Of course, there's lots more variables, right? We have children to manage. We need to see after their needs, how that maps with us. We have desires for our own fulfillment and my wife's fulfillment of her own interests and so on. Lots of variables to put in that mix.
But you're leaving room for surprise.
Indeed.
Nice. All right, so Lipton Tea Time. What's your favorite word?
Interesting.
That's your favorite word?
Yeah.
Interesting. Nice. And what's your least favorite word?
It's an expression, double click.
Why
It's like, how many times, and it's mainly a VC thing, or double click on that for me. It's like, could you just explain it to me? Like, why this kind of...
I have never heard it used in that kind of
It
phrase.
is.
Oh,
It
that is horrible.
Double click on that for me. I was like...
That is horrible. I agree with you on...
I have to pin my eyes on Zoom that I don't roll back into the back of my head when someone says that.
Oh man, you can tell I've never been in a meeting with a VC.
Not all VCs use it. It's just
And now if someone does, it won't be I will have a nice little smile on my face.
Internally,
and I'll have a nice little memory.
Absolutely. I have to stay.
And what turns you on?
Ooh, what turns me on? Kevin Little inspired. Sexy smarts. I love, there's something very attractive to me, and my wife had this about people who can clock people, figure them out, and not manipulate them, because it sounds like I'm this kind of evil MI6 manipulator here, but people who understand dynamics.
And could navigate people.
Totally. And she had that, so I was like, oh, I like this. It's sexy smart.
Nice. And what turns you off?
Intolerance. I really hate intolerance. And funny that, right? I am intolerant of intolerance.
That's very true. But I think that's a valid thing to be intolerant of, frankly. What sound or noise do you love?
My daughter playing in the bath at night. If I'm a little bit come in the door and I hear her kicking her feet in the bath, I'm like, that's something there.
That's nice. And what about a sound or noise that you don't love or hate?
The alarm in the morning. I am a well-known sleeper. I love to sleep, and so that...
But you try to maintain your wake up every day.
Unsuccessfully, let me tell you right now.
I'm so bad at it.
Mainly because my daughter's waking me up at very odd hours of the night.
What's your favorite curse word?
A simple one, shit, but mainly because of the character in The Wire, best television series ever made.
Definitely agreed.
What's his name? I forget, but he has this. You can go and see
Wendell Pierce's character, and I don't remember his name. And we go, shit.
you can see the supercut on the internet of him going, shit.
What is his name? What is his character name in the show? But it's Wendell Pierce.
I don't think it's Wendell Pierce. It's not Wendell. It's the guy who was...
I have my phone.
Yeah, no, it's... What was his name? What was his character's name?
We will figure it out
Indeed.
and I'll throw it in the episode notes.
Nice.
And other than the profession you're currently doing, what is one that you would like to do?
Other than the profession I'm currently doing, what would I be? Something totally different. The kind of hotelier running a B&B on a beach in the Caribbean.
I can see you doing that, though.
It's this chilled out hotelier on a beach in the Caribbean. And it's totally antithetical to anything
That will be
today.
well dynamically priced.
Indeed. Indeed. It'll be very accurately priced for the demand.
And what about one that you wouldn't like to do?
Politician.
Mm.
It's quite funny. People always, you should go run for office in Trinidad, right? Trinidad has lost people. The brain drain
is real.
It's real, right?
Here we are filming in London.
Indeed. So you should go and do some public service. You should do national service, essentially, and go. I would be a terrible politician.
Why do you think you'd be a terrible politician? I know you wouldn't want to do it, but why do you think you'd be bad at it?
I have such intolerance for bureaucracy and BS. Like, I really...
Maybe that's why you need to do it, though.
I know. It grates on me. Just everything that people associate with political infighting. It was like people who fight to the death for some narrow universe of the world and engage in this kind of backbiting bureaucratic BS.
Yeah.
Like, oh.
And also politics in Trinidad is a whole different beast unto its own.
Indeed.
And if heaven exists and you were to arrive at those pearly gates, whoever is there to meet you, what do you hope they would say?
You, Jason Pinto, have led a life that maybe you didn't cure cancer or create world peace, keep your ego in check, but you led a life that basically moved the world forward in some small positive way.
Yeah.
Okay, keep your ego in check, Jason. There are lots of people who have cured cancer and led to world peace, but you haven't maybe been ambitious enough in that regard. But your children are good people, and you left them behind, and they're doing great things in their own right. And your legacy is one that people remember fondly.
I think you're well on your way to that. I think so.
Hopefully some time
Jason
left.
Pinto, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been such a lovely time. And I even learned even more about you, which is so good. And I'm really appreciative of you joining me here today.
Zara, thank you so much for the opportunity. I feel like my ego is expanded by many fools sitting here talking about myself for a long time.
But it's a
I'll
good
try and put it
story,
in
man.
check.
It's great.
I'll try.
And
Thank
the
you.
people want to know, and the people will know. And this is going to be part of the legacy.
Thank you very much, Zara. You're doing amazing stuff. And hopefully this contributes to the onward and upward motion of us all.
And while I will see you some Sunday by you, we'll continue to all talk.
Indeed.
Or randomly your Christmas with all the families.
Exactly.
Actually, maybe we need to do that.
This Christmas,
Maybe we need to do that.
It'll be here before we know it.
Oh,
May already.
gosh. So here we are. Thank you again.
Thanks, Zara.
And have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
That's all, folks, for today's episode of I Do What I Do. Biggest thank you to you for listening and to my guests for sharing their journey. I am Zara Bartels, and a super duper special shout out to the incredible folks that supported me on this creation. Keegan Simon, individual, for my logo and social graphics. Nikolai Labari for my theme music, and Andres Albert for being there and doing all the things while we recorded at TYX Studios in King's Cross, London. Walk good, keep doing what you do. Until next time.